Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today is part 2 of working on the rooming house attic. Now in our last video, we completed the door frame. Now today we're going to go ahead and create that wall for the false stairwell in the attic. Now I'm creating a stairwell with foam core, and I'm going to make it to match the beadboard that's already currently in that attic space. I am using my speed square to help me make it a little bit. I'm actually not sure what I'm doing with that speed square. So let's continue. So I've already pre-cut several birch wood sticks, which are the long coffee stir sticks. And one by one, I just simply added them on top of the Gorilla Wood glue on the foam core. I will advise that you clamp your sticks as you go because that wood will begin to bow and it'll be difficult keeping things straight. So when you get to a certain point in your project, I would advise that you clamp things down. Now, dolls, I use binder clips as I go, but if you don't have binder clips, make sure that after you're done, you weight your piece down with some really, really heavy books or something. Now here's my piece of beadboard. Now it's covered with wood on one side. The other side is still foam core. Now I do want to create a border or kind of a rail at the top. So I'm just using a piece of wood that's a little bit wider than the width of the foam core and the beadboard. And that looks nice. That looks like what I would remember. Now the sticks are not perfect, so I'm not worried about it, dolls. You see I flipped it to the bottom because that bottom piece is actually going to be covered by the baseboard, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Now I did end up doing a little bit more trimming and sanding to get it as flat and level as possible because I don't want to have difficulty with that top piece laying flat, and I am going to box it in on the edge as well. Now when I got to the back of the foam core to just brace it to help it to stay square and flat, I added some additional pieces of wood so that it would give the impression that there were 2x4s attached to drywall on the other side. And while I was handling the piece, I realized there needed to be a surface at the bottom to support it. So I added additional pieces to the bottom to have a gluing surface. Then I added tape and allowed it to dry. Now you can see here in this picture how I cut out a little angled area so that the baseboard running along the wall where it's going to fit can pass through so that the false stairwell wall will fit neatly against the sidewall. Now you can see I've added the baseboard. Everything is drying. I just wanted to see how everything would fit. You see the door is in. Again, it's not glued. It's just in place so I can get a feel for what it's going to look like. So I'm giving you a little peek that there's nothing on the other side. There is no actual stairs or stairwell. This just gives the imaginary impression that there's access into this living space for my dolls. Now that the glue is dry, I've got everything placed in its place. It hasn't been glued in because I do need to do some painting and distressing, but I'm glad I'm this close to completion because it sounds like there are guests coming in the front door. Come on, let's see what's happening among the dolls. So Marguerite's family has finally arrived. Her mother, father, sister, brother, and grandmother are all here to meet Sadi and determine whether he's a suitable love interest for their daughter. Marguerite's siblings, Claude and Mabel, are amazed by the little babies in the room. Meanwhile, Sterling and Miss Maisie advised Aunt Janie that they'll be staying longer than they originally planned, and based on the amount of luggage they brought, really gives the impression that they won't be leaving anytime soon. When Grandpa heard all the commotion, he said a quick hello, then he and all the boys rushed out to the dining room to go have a snack. When Big Ma came in the room, she gave Miss Marva a great big warm embrace and told her how happy she was to meet her. Big Ma told Marguerite's mom that she felt like she knew her already because of how lovely Marguerite was and all the wonderful things she said about her family. Marguerite's grandmother was beaming with pride as she listened to the good report about her granddaughter. Big Ma began to explain the details about accommodations there at the rooming house while Aunt Janie let everyone know that Marguerite's family was here. Big Ma advised her family to make themselves comfortable while they prepared them something to eat, and Big Ma told them to help themselves to the hot coffee until everyone was down to make their proper introduction. Little Mabel and Claude were still mesmerized by all the beautiful little babies in the music room. Some of the ladies were waiting in the back hall. They were waiting for their husbands so they could all go in and meet Marguerite's family. Soon Isabel and Lillian left to go help in the kitchen. Suddenly Marguerite burst into the parlor and saw her father, and immediately her eyes filled with tears of joy. Although Marguerite was nearly 20 years old, she was still Daddy's little girl. Marguerite also embraced her mother. She was so glad to see her. Her mother told her how proud she was that she had represented the family well. While Marguerite was embracing her mother, she realized that they had brought honey with her. Marguerite ran to her immediately and fell to her knees and dropped her head in her grandmother's lap. Miss Maisie loved Marguerite, and Marguerite absolutely adored Miss Maisie. While everyone looked on, smiling at Marguerite, Big Daddy entered the room to greet Marguerite's father, Sterling. There was a warm handshake and a smile. They had been communicating through letters regarding Sadie and Marguerite, so they confirmed today was a big day. All the rest of the men from the rooming house entered the room: Pop, Uncle Benny, Uncle Barley, and Alvarez. They all greeted Sterling and his wife with a warm welcome that only the residents of the rooming house can give. Meanwhile, in the hallway just outside the laundry room, Albert was trying to encourage Sadie that everything would be okay, that he just needed to let Marguerite's father know that he was a hard-working, honest man, and that he only had good intentions toward Marguerite, that he was in love with her, and that he just wanted permission to court her for marriage. Albert was convinced that if Sadie let her father know that everything would be fine. After that, Sadie was encouraged, and he was hopeful that that would win over Marguerite's family's favor and that he wouldn't have to worry about Aunt Bess anymore. In the midst of the men laughing and talking, they quickly realized they needed to move their guests' luggage out of the music room. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Aunt Bess and Lillian were diligently preparing food for Marguerite's family. Aunt Bess stayed back in the kitchen to clean up while Violet served the family. Marguerite ate with her family to catch up on all that had happened while she had been away from home. The rest of the family was quietly talking about the exact time to allow Sadie to come down and meet Marguerite's father. They made sure the doors were closed while they were talking. They advised the ladies in the music room to alert them if anyone came out of the cafe. They could tell that dinner was wrapping up and everyone was on pins and needles waiting for Sadie to meet Marguerite's father. When everyone was back in the parlor, Big Daddy motioned for Sadie to come out to meet Marguerite's father. Sadie stepped out and proudly reached his hand out to give Marguerite's father a nice, strong, firm handshake and to say what he needed to say to her dad. Sterling just stared at Sadie. He didn't say a word. He didn't even move. It was as if he was frozen. After a few minutes, everything became very awkward in the room. He just continued to stare. Everyone in the room was starting to get very confused, especially Sadie. And then Miss Marva sat down in a chair and began to cry. When Marguerite's mom started to cry, Marguerite started to cry. Everyone was in an uproar. Nobody knew what to do. They all waited for Sterling to respond, and suddenly he just walked out of the room. Everybody was confused. Marguerite and her mother were crying, and Sadie was in absolute shock. When Marva composed herself, she told Sadie she knows what's wrong, but she can't say that everything's okay, but there's some things that Sterling's going to have to explain to him. Miss Marva advised Sadie that there were some things that happened a long time ago that none of them knew about, and the connection wasn't clear until today. Sadie was trying to hold back his emotion. He could hear Marguerite crying. Although Sadie's heart was breaking, it was breaking even more to hear Marguerite cry. He wanted to make sure she never cried again. Miss Marva knew her husband, and she was trying to urge everyone to wait and just give him a moment to get himself together and come back and explain. Meanwhile, all the men were trying to comfort Sadie. At that point, Pop had had enough, and he left the room to find out where Sterling was. When Pop entered the cafe, there Sterling was. He was standing silently at the door of the cafe, staring out the window.